welcome. This is the last reading of the series this year, Great Writers, Great Readings. We have a great writer here, and I know he's a great reader. Next year, the first reader, I'm only going to tell you the first reader of the series next year, late September, I don't have the exact date in my mind, Natasha Trethewey will be reading, the poet Natasha Trethewey. I'm here to welcome David Baker and to welcome all of you to listen to him for the next, say, 45 minutes, and there'll be a Q&A afterwards, not a long one. And I'll just let you know, if you have a question, you are kindly asked to lower us, go up to the microphone, not you. If you have a question, you walk up to the microphone so that everyone can hear your question, not now, later. I had somewhere to go. I don't know where, but how could it matter so much to go? Asks the speaker in David Baker's poem entitled Errand, a poem some of you have read several times, in which a faun is discovered, a faun born beneath a hydrangea that the speaker had mistaken for a year as an oak tree, a young oak. The tenderness of this poem and the ferocity of observation gives us little inkling of what David Baker is up to in his work all the time. In a symposium on Emily Dickinson, I think it was in 2014, the remarks that David Baker made include a telling insight into his own finely tuned aesthetic, a sensibility that invites extremes of human experience, from the intensely private, the hungry night always within us, as he puts it, to the manifestly social, and embraces harmonies and contradictions that exist in ourselves and in relation to whatever is other. And now I'm quoting a small passage of David's. I find her, meaning Emily Dickinson, the single most ferocious, terrifying, and intrepid lyric poet of our language, with Milton, Blake, maybe Berryman, maybe Plath, for the sheer proximity to chaos, devastation, psychic and physical rupture, obliteration. Yet she wrote about what was right there, at the window, out the door, in the trees or the sitting room of the big house on Main Street. She wrote a poetry of intimacy and intimate proximity, unquote. A radically subjective perspective, intimate proximity, may reach persons outside one's circumference of being in time, identity, place, and close attention to the natural world, and attentiveness so entire that we forget ourselves, enter a state of speechless wonder or dread, may give us the freedom to renovate our relationship to language, discover new rhythms, recover old forms, and if poetry is one's medium, to compose indelible lines, recreate lyric shapes. Hear how Baker moves seamlessly from the plain to the Baroque, his syntax fluid, then interrupted, incorporating rupture and rapture before coalescing, embodying how we are broken and remade. I'm quoting here from another poem. There's your mother wetting back your wild curl. I'm your father, that's us three, pointing up. Dear girl, they will not. It's we who do. And the poem, which is the title poem of his collection, Never Ending Birds, referring to a remark that the young daughter says, never ending birds. One of the newest poems, which David Baker chose to open his just published collection, Swift, New and Selected Poems, is called Pastoral. What a familiar word. We think we know what it means, expect where it will take us. But at its origins, pastoral is not only a mode of lyric, but something that heals the spirit. Like much that can heal, terror and beauty dwell in close proximity here at the center of a field of green leaves waving. Born in Bangor, Maine, David Baker has spent much of his life in the Midwest in swift, new and selected poems published by Norton just at the very, very beginning of April this year. David Baker gathers poems from 8 collections, all 8 of his full-length volumes, including his recent 2 volumes, Scavenger Loop and Never Ending Birds, the latter winner of the Theodore Ruthke Memorial Poetry Prize. Swift opens with 15 new poems. A parsimonious selection from each of his collections then follows 7 poems from each collection, but in the last section, a total of 7 poems from his very first 2. And I'm very curious about, of course, the magic number 7. Baker is also the author of 6 critical books, including an exquisite anthology of essays he edited and to which he contributed, The Radiant Lyre, and most recently, Seek After, on 7 modern lyric poets, which is for sale along with some of his more recent collections and the new and selected, right there. He teaches at Denison University, where he holds the Thomas B. Fordham Chair of Creative Writing and is the longtime poetry editor of the Kenyon Review. He has received fellowships and awards from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Poetry Society of America, and the Society of Midland Authors. Join me now, please, in welcoming this distinguished poet and wonderful human being. Thank you.
I'm just going to bring all my stuff up here. I'll talk behind this here in a second. We write hoping, dreaming to be engaged with the kind of attention that Phyllis pays. I'm really grateful. We'll see. I recognize a lot of you from this afternoon. So when she said we have questions and answers, we've been there, but maybe you'll have some more, or maybe I'll have some, and we'll do that. We'll do that later. I'm going to read you some poems of mine and say how grateful I am to be invited to be with you and to read some poems and to be in this little room with you. There's a lot of things you could be doing tonight, and you're here. That makes you kind of special, geeky. Me too. I'm often there or there or there or there in a room like this. I love to go to readings and spend my time listening to somebody sing words to you. And every now and then I get to be the person to do that, and I'm grateful for the chance. I'm going to start with a poem that I didn't write. It is National Poetry Month, and this is a poem written by a very dear friend of mine and of Phyllis's, one of the great American poets who died a week ago today. His name is Stanley Plumlee, and that's why I'm reading his poem. He wrote this poem about John Keats, a poet that he loved. We sort of keep each other alive. That's what I'm doing as well. He knew more about John Keats than John Keats did. This is called Constable's Clouds for Keats. You guys know Keats? Yeah, look at all you shaking your head. Yeah, good for you. Constable was a painter. Constable's Clouds for Keats. They come in off the sea, peaceable masters, and hold the sea in the sky as long as they can. And you write them down in oils because of their brilliance, and to remember each in its turn, each one. It is 1822 after the Regency, and it would be right in the year after his death to think of these, domed above the heath in their isolated chronicle, as elegies of the spirit. Right to see these forms as melancholy hosts, even at this distance. Yet dead Keats is amorphous, a shapelessness reforming in the ground, and no one you know enough to remember. He lies in the artist's paradise in Rome among the pagan souls of sheep at pasture. You'll lie in Hampstead, where he should have stayed to meet you on your walks up Lower Terrace or along the crowning High Street heading home. Your clouds grow whiter, darker, more abstract from one elaborate study to the next, correlatives or close to the real sentiment that lives, you say, in clouds. Subjects to counterweigh the airy gravity of trees and leaping horses. Keats could have met you. You must have seen him once against the light, at least. He could be crossing on Christchurch Hill Road now, then over to the Elm Row and down Old Admiral's Walk. He could be looking at the clouds blooming between buildings, watching the phantoms levitating stone. He was there your first Heath summer, writing odes, feeling the weather change from warm to chill, focused no less than you on daylight's last detail, wondering what our feelings are without us. Stanley Plumlee. So I have a new book. He said it was National Poetry Month. It's also National Pecan Month. It's National Frog Month. It is National Kite Month. It is National Irritable Bowel Syndrome Month. How about them apples? It is National Sports Eye Injury Awareness Month. I know this. I know this because I got crazy and looked them up. This is how many months this month is. Everything's a PR thing, right? We'll do it for a month and then we'll forget it. National Poetry Month. I like Frog Month. I like Frog Month. It's also National Month that David has a new book. This book was released 2 weeks ago and a day or two ago, a book called Swift. It took me 5 years to put this book together. Not write it, just put it together. 5 years. And I was freaking out about this reading tonight, trying to figure out what I was going to start with, what I would read, and then I thought, well, you big dummy, read the first poem. So I'm going to read the first poem and the second one. They're both elegies, like the poem that I read for Stanley, and I'm kind of still in that mood. The first one's a little bitty one for my mother, who died 4 years ago last month. And the second one is an elegy for my father, who died 2 years ago last month. I think you've looked at this one, some of you. This one's called Pastoral. Here at the center of a field of green leaves waving, center of a grief I can't see far enough to tell how it will ease. It will not ease. It goes on and on now, as yours does, in sunlight and in rain, holding hands with her in the last minutes. Sky so vast, hear the wheat roar. This one is called Why Not Say. There's a line from Robert Lowell. This is like poetry night. I'm going to name all the poets I like. Robert Lowell. My favorite Robert Lowell poem is a poem called Epilogue. And it's got my favorite Robert Lowell line in it. Many of you write poems. I know that we were talking about that. And we were talking about how hard it is to figure out what to write about. Here's Lowell's line. Why not say what happened? If it were that easy, right? Why not say what happened? This terrible blow, this breaking. Then slow the dogwoods, strewn like tissue along the black road. No, the busy pollinators, the breeze in the pine shadows, in the aftermath where I drove back there, and two bones of smoke lifting ahead along the shoulder in the high new green weed bank running beside the asphalt. No, I had come from my father. Nothing more common, nothing more than such. I could not breathe for the longest time, over and again. There was something deadly, she said, in it. Of the genus Buteo, as B. harlani, as Harlan's redtail, blocky in shape, says the book, blood or brick red, but white, I am sure, underneath, white along its wing, which was not smoke, but rising now, one bird. I was coming back and couldn't breathe, and him bruised, torn, bedridden, tubed, taken to the brink by his body and carried aloft. There he had fallen. This is what happened, said the medical team. Fallen. And ripped aortal stenosis in the process of their repair. No. The white bird strained as trying to lift to a slight dihedral, the deepest deliberate wing beats, and barely above the snow-white-lipped grasses and the shoulder, until I thought I would hit it. It happened, or it did not, in my way of thinking. And now why I saw. Two lengths of snake, helical, and alive in the talons, heavy there, writhing, so the big bird strained for the length of time that it takes, like the oiled inner organs of a live thing heaving in shreds, the dogwoods, the doctors, and did I say the horrible winds all before. Now the air after storm, the old road empty, swept white, by blossoms, by headlights, my father hovering still, why it flew so close, why it was so terribly slow. I think I hoped it would tear me to pieces, lift me of my genus, helpless, as wretched, and drop me away. I turned back to the animal. No, it turned its back to me. We were talking in our little group before this afternoon about listening. We were talking about music and sound. I'm going to just read a little poem about listening and sound, and a little bitty sound. I go as often as I can to a little island east of Cuba, east of Puerto Rico, called St. John. Little island, not many people there. 3/4 of the island is a protected nature preserve. I go there for that. 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the evening in the summers. It's beautiful there, and then there's a little sound. It's the tree frogs. The tiny little tree frogs. I've gone 10 times to this island. I've never seen one. They're so little. This is about the sound they make. That's Lowell. What did he say? Why not say what happened? Okay. Tree frogs. One starts. The still heat is a blown curtain. The curtain wavers then, now 2 of them. And from beyond the blue agave, another. Soon the whistling, weet, eat, eat. The many, so many tree frogs, no bigger than thumbprints. Eleuthodoctus coqui, the common coqui, which we've never seen but in books. Not once. Now the purring, the rolling coo of the mourning dove song of the island toads, among the 100 frogs and crickets, grilly die in late day rising salt background waves as in the bay the small squall we didn't see at first is a gray-bellied cloud in the still yet azure twilight sky, and the container ship pulls on through the sheath of mist, a distant bell among the white cedars. Can the ending of things ever be heard? So slowly it crawls with the gross weight of all our needs, our goods, our ghosts. Such little things we are, and so much noise. After. This one takes place on the same island. We came to the island. We stayed in the house. Rain and sun, bougainvillea, pink cedar. How many shadows slipped along walls or wetted the leaves of century plants? We saw clouds from the window, far boats. You left the bed and came back shaking. Your mother, her white hair, or something whose shape would never at last find you. Night palms clattering like hungry bulls. Crazy whistling of the island peepers. We walked to the water, walked back. We walked to the water, walked back. I think I'm going to read a poem I've never read before. This is a very new poem, but Phyllis is here, and this is what poets do. This is what I've been working on for all year. 30 lines of poem. If I can find this poem. Phyllis and I have been buddies for a long time. The loneliness of animals. For the guys who were there this afternoon, this one's in 9-syllable lines. I don't think I know what it feels like. I know I don't. To drag oneself so slow. Wait, I'm going to start over. Because I use little quotes in this poem from a couple of articles and a couple of people, and I'm going to do this. I hate that, but I'm going to do that so you can see where every now and then there's some language pulled in. So, okay, here we go. The loneliness of animals. I don't think I know what it feels like. I know I don't. To drag oneself so slowly, like a zombie, down a cracked, hard, rock-cut creek bed in Illinois, to be lifted, still churning one's legs, to be the subject of such testing, to be found to be Macrochylis timoniki from one's own fine bloodline by DNA of the genus Chelidra, a la Conrad Jacob Timonek, native to a region that makes up the northernmost end of the species range. And now a real shock to biologist Chris Phillips, who'd been diving, hoping to find, he said, one male alligator snapping turtle with a transmitter on its back. The last one, precisely, he'd previously released in the area with hopes of spurring population growth. And not this. Female, at 22 pounds, way bigger than expected, spring-like neck dorsal ridges like some plated dinosaur. So he held her. Ethan Kessler, grad student, just so, as he was taught, for the photo, hand behind her head, hand to the side, along her shell back, ginger, so not to lose a thumb. To her steel trap jaws. The turtle's mouth is camouflaged and it possesses a vermiform, i.e. worm-shaped, appendage at the tip of its tongue to lure fish by imitating movements of a worm, drawing prey to the mouth. Adds Wikipedia, they do not make particularly good pets. So when they reintroduced her back into the wild, by which I think they mean dredged rivers, drained swamps, small wood runs, culverts, check dams, irrigation, crop circle exurbs. Her battery transmitter died immediately. And finding her in the water's depths again might take 30 years. Let's hope so. This is for you guys who had to read my poems. This one's Errand. You ask about this today. By the way, it says in here, and Phil has pointed this out to you, I'm so pleased, that the speaker of this poem couldn't tell the difference between a hydrangea and a maple. An oak. Well, there is a type of hydrangea called the oak leaf hydrangea. Okay. Because otherwise you would know the difference between a hydrangea and an oak. Okay. You've got to clear that stuff up. Errand. The fawn was born beneath the hydrangea I had mistaken for a year as a young oak. I squatted there. No fear. It lay alone in the leaves, and at my near touch, a tuft of its skin, you couldn't call it hide, barely fur, still birth-smeared in smatters of pale gray spots. One tuft of skin quivered as though cold. Even this first day, the doe had gone to find herself something to eat in a better yard. Error on error, a life amasses. Do you believe the old poet? Not to be born is reckoned best of all. So let's ask the bird dog, gagging at his chain 2 yards over, bloody with boredom. Ask the night black vultures kettling over the neighbor's burn pile. I had somewhere to go. I don't know where, but how could it matter so much to go? Smell of snow an hour before it falls, then doesn't. Soft leather nose of the fawn wet in my palm where it nestled its warm jaw in. To make a cathedral I should have stayed of such things. I'm going to read another poem by other than myself. Another poet I dearly love, who died about a month ago, was W.S. Merwin. I think the greatest poet of our time. We all have our favorites. Mine's Merwin. I knew him since 1970. I first met him in 79, but I sent him a letter in 1978 with a terrible master's thesis that I'd written, and he wrote back. I thought, we're friends now. And I saw him on and off for decades then. He died at the age of 91, blind, as he'd been for the last couple of years, but he was still writing poems. I'm going to read you the last poem in his last book. That seems fitting, right? This is just a little simple poem called The Present. This one kills me. As they were leaving the garden, one of the angels bent down to them and whispered, "I am to give you this as you are leaving the garden. I do not know what it is or what it is for, what you will do with it. You will not be able to keep it, but you will not be able to keep anything." Yet they both reached at once for the present, and when their hands met, they laughed. That's how you do that. I'm going to read you a slightly longer poem, not too much longer, but a little bit longer. I have to tell you a quick story about it. It's about a bug. There's a bug called the emerald ash borer. Do we know this bug? Mostly not. I'll tell the story of the bug in the poem. This is a little insect that was imported mistakenly, errantly, about 15 years ago on a boat down the St. Lawrence Seaway into Lake Erie, and was offloaded in some shipping crates off Lake Erie. And this bug, who isn't supposed to live here, has flourished by finding a tree that it lives off of, the emerald ash. And it has devastated the ash trees. In my village in Ohio, they're all gone. Hundreds of ash trees are gone. And the numbers are staggering. The numbers are in the poem. But this is a poem about that bug and about our stupidity, or our just dim-witted inalertness to the little things like this that we do without understanding. There's another thing that happens. There's a description of a tree in here, and it's a tree with three trunks. Birches often grow with three trunks. In this one, I used to take my daughter when she was a little girl to vacation up on Lake Erie, and it's where I taught her how to ride a bike. There was one of these trees, but it was a weird one because it finally dawned on me that this tree, it had two trunks with one kind of leaf and one trunk with another kind of leaf, and one of those was an ash tree. So that happens in here too. I guess that's all you need to know. And for the gang who was there this afternoon, 10-syllable lines in this one. It's called What is a Weed? Emerald as in the leaf of the ash, though nothing's burned, not yet, as the ash-green, gray-green, fiery wingspan of the adult, whose bullet body and flat black eyes are less the way we know them than by the trees, by the death of the trees, by the millions. The adults emerge, a plenipennis, of the genus Agrillus in May, June, July, then in bark crevices, between layers of the diamond derma, females set their eggs, whose larvae in a week bore back into the trees. They chew the phloem, they eat the inner body of the bark, creating winding galleries as they feed. This cuts the flow of water nutrients to the tree. This causes dieback, causes death. What is a weed? What I saw was a tree, 1,000 trees in the village, more, but one at the point of the street corner lot where all summer I held my girl by the back of her bike and ran the green block down. The tree was obvious, catalpa, its long 3 branching trunks splayed like a birch, whose shagbark white parchment skin is equally unmistakable. Leaves as big as a piece of paper. If a page were a heart, or head of a spade, and the pale green, foot-long at least bean pods dangling like ropey toys. 3 trunks pushing from our one earth, equally thick, the same height, and then among 2 trunks of waving catalpa, I saw ash leaves, fist-sized but delicate, blooming from the 3rd. All over the village, the ashes are dying. Already dead, my tree friend says. The scourge, emerald ash borer, rode in on shipping crates, Asia, via Lake Erie, 2002. They date it to the month. And in bundles of firewood, in luggage of travelers, in bedding plants, their radiant splay spread like wildfire up Ontario, down through Illinois, Ohio, and now 7.5 billion ash trees. Mountain white, Fraxinus americana, and blue, fragrant, Carolina, green, family of Oleaceae, of opposite branching, of compound pinnate leaf, whose timber is wonderfully springy, excellent for oars and tools, and lends itself to steaming and turning, as in bent wood furniture will die, though some refer to them as trash. Trash, ash. What is a weed? And the answerer says, a plant that doesn't fit the local plan. In my personal doctrine of signatures, you can tell the emerald ash borer simply by its hole, the letter D, as it emerges from the host, each circle with a flattened edge or side, 100 or more, like buckshot on a tree sometimes, or on a tree braided to another tree. 2 catalpas growing with a 3rd. I pushed my daughter down the street, let go, and her laughter lit the waiting trees. Ash or trash, catalpa, oak, the neighborhood where she learned to fly. Then the trees grew wings. Phyllis said when she was talking about my book, Swift, that there's a group of new poems at the beginning. There are 15. The last 5 of them, they're groups of, I like numbers, they're in groups of 5, 3 groups of 5. The last 5 have a little bit more acute political or social edge to them. I guess that's what you call that. I don't know what you call that. This is one of those. This is a poem called Checkpoint. It starts with 2 lines that I stole from Emily Dickinson, whom you now know I really love. Emily Dickinson. Paige and I were at the Morgan Library a couple of years ago for the Emily Dickinson show, and there were poems. I adore Emily Dickinson. There were poems in her handwriting, her manuscripts, in her little crabby, weird, slanted handwriting, in her pencil or her pen on her lined paper. I thought I was going to die. I wanted to touch them. You know, you don't do that. There was Emily Dickinson's high school yearbook. Did you know there was such a thing? There was the one photograph of Emily Dickinson, the one oil portrait with her kind of brownish hair. And there was, in a little case, you don't need to know this. This isn't in the poem. It's just so cool. You've seen pictures of Emily Dickinson? Yeah. In a case about this big, wooden with a glass front, was a great big coil of Emily Dickinson's hair. Oh, her real hair. Ready for this? Her bright red hair. Yeah, Emily Dickinson had bright red hair. She looked like Lucille Ball, just this flaming red hair. And the daguerreotype picture of her is just kind of faded. It's sort of brown and it looks auburn, dusty, whatever, bright red hair. You just got to know stuff like that. So one of the poems begins with this line. It's about her yard and it's about the birds coming back in the spring. It's a poem about migration. So that's how I start. I just used Dickinson. But somewhere halfway through the poem, migration turns into immigration. And I have been reading, I have been studying on the web, especially on a site called BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed has a series of articles or a series of how-to advice columns if you are without documents and you're trying to come to the country, if you're an undocumented immigrant, and you get caught and you get questioned, as you will, by ICE, by Homeland Security, what are the likely questions they're going to ask you? And it helps you prepare your answers. Isn't that weird? Yeah. So this poem migrates from one thing to another. Checkpoint. These are the days when birds come back. That's the Dickinson line. Anyway, I got to start over. These are the days when birds come back. These are the days, the birds. These days, these birds. These days are these birds. Let us see these days, these papers. When are these birds? And where are your papers? Where are you going? Come back. Answer me where you are going. Behind the barn, the flame tree, our fire, our wings, these birds. Behind the trees, the bursting winds, the birds. These days come back. They do not. There, what color is your ruby throat, your toothbrush? Yellow-breasted warbler, green flame, blue jay, marsh thrush among the light, the lush, low, timid leaf, she said, by the river. What fire is your nova, your wife's hairbrush? Take off your shoes, take your hands off, stop right there. So many coming over, as so many millions fewer wings. These papers of fragile bones vanished. They are not. Where are you going? I said. Come back. Peril sonnet. Where do you suppose they've gone? The bees. Now that you don't see them anymore. Four-winged among flowers. Low sparks in the clover, even at nightfall. Are they fanning? Have they gone another place, blued with pollen, stuck to their bristles, waiting beyond us? Spring dwindle is what we call it. Collapsing neonicotinoids, high level in pneumatic corn exhaust, loss of habitat, or disappearing disease in the way of our kind, so to speak. What do you think they would call it? Language older than our ears. Were they saying it all along, even at daybreak? I'm going to read two more poems. This one is, I think it's in here, a spring poem about Ohio. And it is now spring in Ohio. I'm an outdoors guy. Spring, I get my big boots on and I'm in the woods, tromping around in the woods. And in the woods, the first thing that happens in the woods in the spring is a little category of wildflower called spring ephemerals. Do you know that term? No. is a kind of generic term for a bunch of like wild ginger or bitterroot, or in this case, trillium, little bitty flowers that are the first things up in the spring. And they flower for like 2 days and then go and fall down, and then the trees start. But these are the first things up. It's what I look for. I see a spring ephemeral and I think, thank God, winter's done. This is about the trillium, and a rare one. I had some property and I had a group of very rare trilliums. They're rare because of their color. Trillium's usually white, sometimes a little bit of yellow. This was in 10-syllable lines for you guys. The first year I found it by accident, working my machete to make out of the woods a walking path. Not quite creekside, but in the tree shadow of the creek. Trillici, or birthroot, wake robin, or any kind of lily whose petals might wake a robin into wings, as this does, 3-winged, if not creekside, but close, beneath a hedge apple, itself not an apple. Its blossom is like a lily, in this case, Trillium flexipes, for drooping, as I found the next year, maroon under 3 leaves, and swinging there like a bell. The little brown-red bell blossom was gone the next day. And the next year, knocked or nosed down by deer. Picking the flower of trillium can injure the plant seriously, says my book. May die or take years to recover. So I built barricades of small branches, cages, crossbars, as soon as these new leaves uncapped, to keep out the deer, yet airy enough to let in some sun. Ephemeral angel wing of blossoms, half as light in the green long shadow of wild rye grasses, and the shadowy maroon blossoms hung for a week. More, browned, peeled, seeded, then dropped. The next year, the drought year. Yet I found it again this April, walking the path, which is not my path, not anymore. The deer have fled deeper as well away from us, and us, not us anymore. Obstinate blooms. Last poem. And I'm going to hang around up here for questions if we want to do that. But I will say before the last poem again, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for having me to Hofstra, which is a gorgeous place. Do you know that? You know that. It's so beautiful here, and thank you to Phyllis for inviting me here. This is the title poem of my book called Swift, and it's about birds. Do you know the bird, the swift? The chimney swift? You've heard of it? Have you ever seen them? I live in this little village in Ohio. 3,000 people in my little village. There's a big old post office on the corner of Main Street and a great big chimney. Nobody in my village knows this, but in late July, in August, and early September, in the evening at 8:20, just as it's getting dark, birds will start to come around from all over the village, and you realize they're singing the same song, and they're flying the same way. Swifts fly like this. It's the only bird that flies like this. Birds fly like this. Swifts fly like this. They look like bats, though bats aren't birds, right? We know that. And there'll be hundreds of them up in the sky circling the chimney, and then, well, you can guess what happens. What happens is me, the stupid poet, is standing there on the corner. I'm the poet of the village, standing there on the corner going, oh, look! And everybody's walking around going, what the heck? It's David again. He's doing the poetry thing. We don't know what he's doing. I'm watching the birds. Swift, swift. Oh, what did Lowell say? Why not say what happened? You just watch the world and it will give you poems. Watch hard, though. Swift into flight, the name as velocity. A swift is one of 200 or 300 swirling above the post office smokestack. First, they rise, come dusk, to the high sky, flying from the ivy walls of the bank, a few at a time, up from graveyard oaks and backyards, then more, tightening to orbit in a block-wide whirl above the village. Now they are a flock. Now we're holding hands. We're talking in whispers to our kind, who stroll in couples from the ice cream shop or bike here in small groups to see the birds. A voice in awe turns inward. As looking down into a canyon, the self grows small. The smaller swifts are larger for their singing. The spatter and high cheep, the shrill of it, and their quick, bat-like, alternating wings, and the soft pewter sky sets off the black checkmark bodies of the birds as they skitter like water toward a drain. Now one veers, dives as if wing shot, or worse, out of the sky over the maw of the chimney, flailing, but then pulling out as another dips and the flock reverses its circling. They seem like leaves spinning in a storm, blown wild around us, and we, their witnesses. Witness the way they finish. The first one simply drops into the flue. Then 4, 5, in as many seconds, pulling out of the swirl, sweep down. So swiftly, we're alone. The sky is clear of everything but night. We are standing at a loss within it. So, let's talk, shall we? You do not have to do that, but thank you. Let's talk if you'd like. And as Phyllis suggested, if you have a thing you want to say or a question you want to ask, because they're recording this, please step to that microphone to do that. If you have a thing you want to say or if you just need to get the hell out of here. Anybody want a question? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, microphones are scary, I know. You don't have to, but if you'd like to. I mean, we talked for an hour and a half this afternoon, I realize.
Okay. So, do you need the microphone? Can you hear me? Okay.
I think, they may be
You're
recording
Okay.
it. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned earlier.
You broke it, you
I
bought it.
broke it, my voice. You mentioned earlier you were talking about how many syllables each line had.
Yep.
I wasn't there for that conversation. I'm curious how purposeful they are in your writing and like what draws you to that, the syllables.
Why do that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. It's one form of meter. Meter just means to measure something. I like the math of it. I was a musician. Music is also entirely mathematical. Poetry is mathematical. This number of lines, this number of syllables, some kind of measurement. I need that, or I enjoy the rigor of counting. It makes me press the line. You know, the line pushes from the left side. You've got your margin. But I like to have something pushing from the right side, too. We're the ones who don't go all the way to the right side margin. And so it's important to think about why we don't do that. Why don't we go there? Well, maybe it just looks good and we'll break a line there. That's fine. But I like the expectation of mathematics. So I like this pressure. Because in a poem, there's something pushing up from the bottom, too, right? the bottom is death, the bottom is silence, the bottom is the end. So the thing is being squished. I think that's the thing I like about poetry most. It's language under the most pressure. So why syllabics? Why syllables? I like syllables better than accents. I don't enjoy the of meter. I like the number of syllables with an irregular number of beats. So I'll try to write a line that's, say, got 10 syllables and 3 beats, followed by a line that's got 10 syllables and 7 beats. So there's some irony, there's some competition or discord in the line itself. But pressure. Partly it's pressure on me. If I feel that there's pressure in writing the poem, that can be embedded in the language. That's what I'm looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Good question. I mean, try it. Try a draft of a poem and count syllables, and then try a same draft of the poem and write it in free verse, and then try another draft in accentual syllabic. Try it different ways. Anybody want a question? Yeah, please.
This is more a comment than a question, but I noticed nature was so much of the subject of your poetry, but I'd also like to comment, we have a lot in common. I come and sit at readings like this and love it, and this morning at 8 o'clock this morning, I was at Robert Moses Beach with my binoculars for 2 hours, and then I went home. And at noon, I went to Connecticut Preserve for 2 hours with my binoculars, so we have a lot in common.
Absolutely. Looking, absolutely. We were talking about this in the class this afternoon, too. Somebody asked me, when people read my poems, what do they notice often? And that's often one of the things. I don't know if it's because we feel far away from it or if we feel close to it. There's something delightful to me in the names. Not just like there's a bird, but there's a chimney swift. You heard some Latin. I like the etymology. I like all the geeky names for things. I like to know the real specifics. I have poems that have chemical compounds in them and mathematical formulas. I like all that weird, precise detail of expertise, even if it's not my expertise. Yeah, but just looking, right? Do you keep a life list?
I say amateur.
Yeah, yeah.
About 120 birds.
Ah, cool. Yeah, please.
I am a student of yours,
I recognize you.
and it's good to see you, and it's still great to listen to you.
I've been grinning at you all night.
Denison,
Yeah.
1986, English major.
Isn't that cool? I came to Denison in 1984. Yeah, wow. Do you live here?
I do.
I had more hair.
So you talked about how a lot of your poems are related to looking, and I mean, a lot of your poems are related to looking in one way or another. So how do you feel yourself engaged with the politics of looking? That's something I'm very interested in English literature, is the politics of looking in terms of yourself as a male poet, as a white American poet,
Yeah.
but also just in terms of our current political moment. The politics of looking, how do they manifest in your poetry for you?
Looking and listening both, right? And the obligation that one has toward the casting of a gaze. It's not a simple, pure act. I have, as I said, some of the newer poems try to be attentive to the responsibility of looking and naming and the using of language. If that's what you have in mind, that's what I think about. There's no innocent use of language. So do we then not use it? Or do we use it with some honor? Honor may be too loaded. Awareness, sympathy, that's the big one for me. To write about the thing you're writing about with sympathy and with an awareness of your respect for the autonomy of that thing. How do you do that? I don't know. I read Susan Sontag over and over and over and over. Do you know that book? What's the one about looking? Something of the pain of others. There's something. John Berger is terrific. Or Barth is terrific. But Sontag has the best book I know, and it's about the obligation or the difficulty in writing a journalism that is about the pain of other people. Somebody blown up, somebody in a war, somebody hurt, and what obligation or responsibility the journalist has toward making a story out of somebody else's damage. Regarding the pain of others, that's it. Regarding the pain of others. Read that one. Mm-hmm.
I guess this is kind of a simple question, but I'm always curious when it comes to writers in general. At what age did you start actually writing poetry?
63. I'm hoping. 19. I hated it in high school. I didn't like English. I read like crazy, but I didn't like my teachers. I remember memorizing the opening lines of the prologue of the Canterbury Tales because I had a teacher that made me do it. I still remember it, though, you know. Juan de Prele with a soy sote, the doctor marched, burst to the rote, and bathed every vein, and switch liquor of which virtue engendered is the flower. When I can go on. And I hated that. I love it now. I love all the poems that I was asked to memorize. Okay, so I was a musician. I played a lot of music, and that was my art. And by the time I was 20, I knew I didn't want to, I was good. I played with a lot of people. I knew I did not want to make a living doing that. I would be dead by the time I was 30. The nights were so late. I still have one of the guitars I used to use in one of the bands, and I can still open up the case, and it still smells like smoke. I couldn't do that. And so I laid down my guitar, and I picked up one of those. And it was that simple. This is a preferable instrument for me, and it makes music, and I have better hours. It was in college when I was 19 and 20, and I never looked back.